for coming today. I'm Gwyneth Mallon. I'm the director of the NYU Center for the Humanities, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this event. I want to thank our staff for their help with this event, and that's Carolyn Osi, Denny Valentin, and our student workers, and Alexandria Martinez and Janina Soriano. We've been doing this event about writing and publishing every May and every December for 2 years now. And we always have a writing coach, a university press editor, and a published author to come together and talk about the writing process and the publishing process. And we try to leave lots of time for question and answer with all of you. And really the idea for today is thinking about how to get more words on the page, how to start a connection with an editor, and how to stay productive this January. So that's our little tagline for the day. I'm going to very quickly introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to turn the panel over to Ulrich Baer, who's going to moderate our discussion today. These are very short introductions, so we can spend most of our time talking about writing. Ulrich Baer is professor of German and comparative literature and serves as vice provost for faculty, arts, humanities, and diversity in the provost's office here at NYU. Among his books are the Rilke Alphabet, Beggar's Chicken, Stories from Shanghai, Rainier Maria Rilke, Letters of a Life, and that's a translator, he was translator and editor of that, and 110 Stories, New York Writes After September 11th. Again, I left some out, but that just gives you a sampling of what he's published lately. Susan Ferber is executive editor for American and World History at Oxford University Press, where she's worked since 1997. Her diverse list ranges from ancient history to contemporary history and includes both academic and trade titles. She's edited many first books, as well as the work of senior scholars. Ada Ferrer is professor of history and Latin American and Caribbean studies. Her research focuses on the history of slavery, race, and revolution in Latin America, with a particular interest in the history of Cuba, Haiti, and the Caribbean. Her first book, Insurgent Cuba, Race, Nation, and Revolution, 1868 to 1898, was from University of North Carolina Press in 1999, and her second book, Freedom's Mirror, Cuba and Haiti in the Age of Revolution, was published by Cambridge University Press in December of 2014. And Theresa MacPhail describes herself as a writer with a dusty journalism degree, and she'll tell you more about that. She's a medical anthropologist, and she's an assistant professor at Stevens Institute of Technology. Her first academic book, The Viral Network, A Pathology of the H1N1 Pandemic, was published in December 2014. Theresa is also the author of an entertaining medical thriller about a deadly global pandemic called The Eye of the Virus. And right now, she's working on a popular nonfiction book examining the rise of allergies in America. So she has many different areas with her writing. So without further ado, I will turn you over to Ulrich Baer, who will moderate, and I will thank you again for coming today. And Uli, it's to you.
So thank you, Gwyneth and everybody for coming. As Gwyneth said, we've done this event a few times. We try to be quite concrete in our advice. I also look at all of you and I think, what are you doing here not writing? So some things we want you to take away something that's useful for you. I usually count the days from today until the first day of the official semester, which is in January. So I don't know what it is, 35 days. So you have 35 days. So if you wrote 2 useful pages a day, you would have 70 pages of a manuscript by the time you come back to teach, unless you're teaching in January. You may have other things in between you have to do occasionally. So part of what I try to think about a lot for my own writing, I learned one thing from this panel I mentioned later, actually, from last year, which changed the way I write a little bit, but I try to write every day. It's very, very hard to do. I have a day job. I have kids. I have friends. I have people I like to spend time with. I have to eat. I have to sleep, all of those things. I try to write every day, and I try to calm my mind enough to write for when I have 45 minutes. It's very hard to do because when I was in graduate school a long time ago, I would have 8 hours, and I could barely get started. And now I have 45 minutes, and I'm already kind of packing for my next thing, but I need to write. So I have to calm my mind to write and to connect to what I wrote whenever that was yesterday. Seems like a long time ago. And so that's one of the things we want to talk about, how to use the time you have, how to maximize that. Most of you will not have weeks in a quiet country house with no one bothering or disturbing you, no email access, no news. That doesn't work very well, so we're trying to be proactive. And then I'll just hand it over to my colleagues here. I want to thank, first of all of you for showing up. And I try to write every day a little tiny bit. Second thing I do, I try to give myself external deadlines, which means I give my writing away to people who can give me feedback. As soon as it's out of my hands and someone is coming back, I feel, okay, I'm waiting for someone else to respond to my writing. So I have friends who edit my work. I edit theirs. I don't give them 50 pages at a time. I give them maybe 10. I try to create deadlines with editors that they're expecting me to submit something, which motivates me because I have to have my super ego enforced by somebody else. It's not just me. And the one thing I learned from this panel, someone was here a year ago who said that actually I have in the last year occasionally tried to find 3 days where I can focus on completing a project, something I'd been sort of working on, and spend 3 days, which means for me 3 days of writing really means maybe I write from 9 a.m. till about 1, and then I'm so exhausted and I can't think, and then I need to do something else, and then I go in the afternoon and put some stuff together, do some other work, sort of do my index, do footnotes, but no more. But the next day I do that. But those kind of 4 or 5 hours for me is a huge amount of time right now, because usually I have about 45 minutes. So I'll stop right here, and then everybody else can add something of what you're doing. And then, as Gwyneth said, you should contribute by asking questions of what has worked, what doesn't work. And can you take it from here? Susan, do you want to be the next person? Is that
I think we should go the writing to publishing.
Sure, okay.
Okay. Okay, so you have about 5 weeks, a little more, a little less. So my first piece of advice is to set a schedule. So, moms have those calendars, those weekly calendars where you slot in your kids' activities, slot in your writing. Try to be consistent about it. So I like to say set 2 to 3 hours of writing a day, up to 4, no more than 4, because as Uli said, you get exhausted, your brain gets tired, and it's just a losing battle after that. About 4 hours you can be fresh. So try to do it 5 days a week, like it's a job, because in essence it is. And don't work on weekends and the holidays, because your brain actually needs that time to relax. I know it feels like a crunch, but you'll be way more productive if you stick to the 5 days a week schedule and give yourself the breaks. That being said, don't set unrealistic goals. One of the worst things I see, I'm having problems with this, one of the worst things I see is people sit down and say, well, today I'm going to work on chapter 4. Today I'm going to work on my book. Well, that is setting yourself maybe too broad of a goal, and you don't really have anywhere to start. And especially at the beginning of a project, if you're looking at that blank screen, sitting down and saying, okay, here we go, book time, that's just going to freak you out. So set specific daily goals. So instead of writing chapter 4, say, today I'm going to tackle the theoretical section of chapter 3. And that's what you're going to do. That is your task. There's a reason for this. It's not just so that you don't freak yourself out, and you're laying out a map that you have somewhere to go. It's also because in the afternoons you can prep for the next day of writing. So if you know what you're doing, if you have a concrete, okay, I'm going to work on the introduction to chapter 5, or I'm going to work on the conclusion of this article, then you know what you need to have at hand. You know what pieces you need, you know what research you need to have in front of you, so that when you sit down to actually write, you already have that in front of you. So that's your task for every afternoon. So only write, or whenever you're doing the writing. When you're not doing the writing, your task is to prep for the next thing. That means that you need to stop writing when you know where you're going next. That's a big one. So don't end when it feels good to end just before. Because then when you go back to the writing the next day, you already know what's next, and your brain gets in there without having that moment of doubt and that uncertainty that then can lead you off the path of writing. So always leave yourself the breadcrumb, end when you know where you're doing the next thing. And that'll be easy, because then you'll have research blocks to do to prep for the next day of writing. Take regular breaks. I like to write for 45 minutes and then take 15 minutes off to check Facebook or Twitter. You give yourself a little snack, whatever floats your boat, but you write for 45 minutes and take a break, walk around, do something else. Cautionary tale: when you're writing, write which means do not fall into the trap of rapturous research. A lot of us do this when you're writing. You are like, oh, I need to stop here and read 3 more articles. No, you don't. You really don't. You can, if you really do need to look something up, put it in a bracket in the text and just come back to it. Don't stop the flow of new writing to spend 3 hours researching something. It feels really good, rapturous research. That's why it's such a trap, because it feels productive, and it is indeed productive, but not for the task you've set yourself. If your task is to write, research is not the appropriate time to, that's not the time to do it. It's in the later hours. Try to stay away from editing as you write. You have a certain amount of mental capacity, and if more than 50% of it is as you're writing thinking, this sucks, this isn't good enough, where am I going with this, oh my God, you're actually not focusing on the writing. So if you find you're doing that, try to step away from it, or spend 5 minutes and free write I suck, until you get sick of writing I suck, and then get back to the task at hand. Don't let yourself do the editing as you go, and try not to be your worst critic as you're trying to do new things. Oh, yeah, there's something really up with this. Okay, nope, yes? Oh, okay, great. Oh, so much nicer. Okay, I do have a couple of things, so these are the most important things. So those are all the practical things. But the one thing I really want to hammer home is, so I spent years as a journalist, and I don't know if any of you have ever had to write under a straight deadline, but I worked for a daily paper. So the paper was going out with or without my column, or with or without my inches. You get into the habit of actually producing. What you figure out is writing is thinking. If you think you're going to do some serious thinking and then sit down and write a perfect thought, that's craziness. Writing is thinking. So if you're stuck, keep going. You're getting somewhere. I like to tell people I'm working with to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Those uncomfortable moments when you're writing and you don't know where you're going. Of course you don't know where you're going. That's why you're writing. The writing itself is the thinking. And this is a bit of new advice, because I feel like I don't say this enough to people that I'm trying to help. It's okay. Be a messy scholar. Let yourself be messy. Don't be afraid to struggle with your writing. It doesn't have anything to do with the quality of your thinking. Writing takes practice. You'll get better as you go. Everybody's first draft is shitty. That's why they're called shitty first drafts. Failures are actually good, even though they don't feel good, because you figure out what's not working. So if you've gotten to the end of a chapter and it's not working, great. Now you know that's not working. You learn from it, and then you start again. And finally, guilt about not writing is not productive. Guilt about your writing is not productive, but it feels like you're working on it. It feels productive to feel guilty, so don't do that. Don't allow yourself to feel guilty. It's like people on a diet who have a cookie and then have a whole pizza because they ruined it with a cookie. If you miss a day of writing, don't allow yourself to then miss 5 more days of writing and feel guilty about it. Just be like, all right, I didn't do it, and then get right back on it. So try not to get mired in the little traps that we set for ourselves. So that's it.
All right. Well, some of what I was thinking of saying has already been covered, but I thought I would just speak from my experience as a faculty member at NYU, who tries to write books while also teaching and reading dissertations and serving on committees and raising kids and et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So I think of myself as a good writer, but I also know that I am an exemplary procrastinator. So that has been something that I've struggled with for years and years. What's that?
You've written so much. When do you procrastinate?
Anyway, but if you paid attention to the introduction, you might have noticed that my first book was published in 1999, and my second book was published in 2014. which is 15 years. I personally think that as a historian, 15 years isn't that much. But sometimes while I was in the thick of it, it felt like a lot of time. And some of the time it took to do that second book made perfect sense. There were many more archives than there were with the first book. There were more languages. There were 2 countries. I was teaching and raising kids and serving on committees and all that stuff, right? So it took a long time. But maybe at about the year 2010, I thought, okay, I really do have to finish this book. I really want to finish this book because I want to write it. I'm also a little getting tired of it and I want to go on to other things. I want to write this book. So I bought myself a book to help me. And the book, I don't know if I'm sure you know it. I don't know what you think of it, but it helped me enormously. It was a book by a guy named David or Peter Sylvia called How to Write a Lot. And it's a tiny little book. And it was just what I needed at that moment to get me going. Now, it had lots of practical advice. It had, not so practical advice. But the reason I took to it was that the first substantive chapter of the book was titled Specious Barriers to Writing a Lot. And I went through all the species barriers, and they all made so much sense. So things that I had told myself all the time, I don't have a good place to write. Right? And then he showed a picture of where he wrote all these books, and it was like this crappy little desk with, whatever. Or I don't have big blocks of time to write. Or I'm too busy to write. And he went through each one of those and debunked them as legitimate obstacles to writing. So it just made it harder for me to use the typical excuses on myself. And there were 2 things in particular that I learned from that book that helped me deal with the monster of procrastination and really, I think, helped me finish that book. Here's a bookmark for the book, if anyone's interested in seeing it later. Anyway, one thing that he said was the excuse of I'm too busy to write. And of course, as busy people, that seems really familiar to us. We have dozens of emails to answer. We have 3 meetings tomorrow. We have to read this dissertation prospectus for the defense, right? And there's always all these things that have very immediate deadlines that are sooner than your deadline for a book or a chapter, and so you focus on those because you have to get them done and other people are waiting for them, right? And so you get into this cycle where you keep expecting to finish all these things that you have to get out of the way before you turn to your writing. So hence, I'm too busy to write. And in this book, the author said, you're not too busy to write. You're too busy because you're not writing. And it seemed counterintuitive, but all of a sudden it clicked for me that if you do the thing of setting a little time aside to write in the morning or in the afternoon or whenever you write best, it actually makes your day calmer. If you don't do that, then you think you have the time to schedule a meeting, to go to lunch with this person, to explore this, to go to this talk, right? So in some sense, because you're not doing the scheduled writing, you're actually making your schedule busier. Once you start scheduling the writing, it's amazing. You get so much less busy when you start writing. And you feel so much calmer and so much better. So that was something that helped me a lot. This realization that I had to stop waiting to finish everything until I could write, because really there's no way you're ever going to finish everything, and therefore you're never going to write. So you just have to write and figure out other ways to finish things. So that's one thing I learned from the book that was really helpful. The other thing was something that you just mentioned, which is the thing of stopping at a point where it's easy to pick up the next day. Now, for me personally, I feel like the costliest part of writing is always the startup. Whether it's the startup at the beginning of a chapter, at the beginning of a book, at the beginning of a day, at the beginning of a section. And that's always where I lose the most time. I get frustrated, you lose confidence, you get distracted, you procrastinate. And so the advice of not stopping when you finish something, right? So you keep going, you write the next few sentences of the next paragraph, so when you get up the next day, you just pick up where you are, and you don't have to wait for the momentum to arrive, right? And that helped me day to day in terms of writing, but it also helped me in terms of thinking about breaks like this one. So because the startup is so costly time-wise, I realized that when I waited to start my writing until the break started, right? So you finish your grading, you go away for the holidays, you come back, and then you go to the AHA for those of us who are historians, and then it's January 10th or something. And then you return to it, and then there's always that startup cost. So then, I have to finish my syllabus. Oh, I have to read admissions files, right? And so what I try to do now is to actually do something before the end of the break so that I have something I can start with. And so different things will work for different people. I mean, you could try just like sitting down and pounding out a couple pages of writing or a couple more. Something that I like, that I think is someone who works on books, sometimes printing out everything you have and putting it in a binder and reading it can be really good. It can also be really disheartening because you start reading and you think, oh my God, this sucks. Oh my God, how am I gonna do this? This is much worse than I remember. And then if that's what you're doing before the break, what I would suggest is you read it again and you take notes as you read it. And after a while, if you just do it enough, if you stick with it rather than putting it away because you think it's bad, you actually find things that are good in it and can kind of develop them more. So those are my 2 pieces of advice, kind of learned and adapted from this book. I finished that book. It was published in December 2014, and now I'm working on a trade book with Scribner on the history of Cuba from the arrival of Columbus to, it was going to be to the arrival of Obama, but now with Trump and the death of Castro, my ending seems less natural, so that might change. But anyway, I made myself write 4 single-spaced pages today. Not quite on that, on something else I have to do, but related to that. So I'm just hoping that just the act of doing that gives me the momentum. And then finally, when I was a kid, I used to go to a daycare center where they forced us to sleep, and I was never sleepy, and so I would get in trouble for not falling asleep. So I would pretend to sleep, and then eventually I would fall asleep. So when I had to start writing my dissertation, the trick I developed was to pretend to write. And so I would sit at the computer, and I didn't type this sucks, but I just kind of just typed. And really, after a couple pages, you're actually writing. So my final thing is like pretend to write in order to write, and that's it.
Well, thank you for having me back. I very much appreciate the chance to see everybody and to see how much you are looking forward to writing, because otherwise you would not have taken time out to come here and spend this very busy end of the semester week with us. I also realized that when I was here, I think it was in May, I was feeling all guilty because I had a writing deadline that I was behind on, and I was thinking how good it felt to come in and say, it's with the copy editor, I don't have to think about it, and it's so short, it's part of an edited volume, but still it's done, and a done piece of writing is a good piece of writing. I'm going to talk about a very practical thing in my 5 minutes with you all today, and I know we'll have lots of questions on lots of different things, but it seems to me that that 5 weeks is a really ideal amount of time to work on a book proposal. This doesn't mean to say that you have to spend every day working on the book proposal, but I think sometimes small chunks of time, and that seems like a rather extended time away from a lot of other people, but still it's a small chunk of time compared to the summer, to think about how to encapsulate all of what you've been thinking and writing and working on, if you haven't already done so, with the idea that this can be something that is your calling card to publishers. And that's very much the way that I think about book proposals. I will say, and I need to start to interject here in the midst of my own presentation, say, any of you have proposals with me right now, I'm very behind on reading them, and I apologize. I'm sure it's not that there's anything wrong with your book proposal, especially if you were here at one of the other sessions. When you have finished hundreds of pages of writing, probably the last thing you want to think about is producing some more. And why would you need to do that if you've got something that is finished or is in a finished form? And I will say it is because I was just in my office and it looks like a disaster area. And the amount of paper that publishers collect, or the amount of email in terms of thinking about large-scale projects, is overwhelming. I always thought I liked to read. I realize how much I am challenged as someone who's not a fast reader in terms of getting through just the volume of new projects and the projects that I have under contract and I'm working on. It is much harder to write something short than it is to write something long. A book proposal is by nature something short. I would not say it's in the 5 pages category, but somewhere in the 10 to 15 page. And if you are working on something that you realize you're having trouble being able to get down and condense in that way, chances are you're not exactly sure what your argument or your book is yet. And I think that it can be helpful to even see that and to begin to imagine it anew. A book proposal is a chance, as I said, for you to give a calling card to a publisher. It may be somebody as an editor who you've met, it may be somebody you haven't met. At least from where I sit, it doesn't really matter because I'm really looking for the writing that is in the book proposal. There are many people that I meet at conferences who have really good ideas. There are many people who are very pleasant to spend time chatting with at conference booths, but I'm really looking for that book proposal that speaks to me, and something that is going to be a potential thing for me to want to read hundreds of pages more. I have handed out some tips because I realize there's no way I can get through this in under 45 minutes, and I think it's important to have something as a sort of template or a set of guidelines. Most publishers have something like this on their website. You do not have to make a different version for every different press that's out there, but I think you can come up with one thing that is the best representation of your project. Before you do the book proposal or alongside it, I would definitely include a cover letter. I probably don't stress this enough because I still get things without cover letters or just with things attached saying, here it is. You want to choose your publisher with the idea that that is the company that you want to keep. And you need to show a publisher why they're the company you want to keep and why it's the editor that you're sending this to. I do not consider it at all strange to get proposals on the great variety of things that are on my list. I do think it's awfully strange when I get things that are intended for a textbook editor or that are young adult or memoir, things that I don't actually publish. You're guaranteeing yourself a rejection if you send things to publishers who are not the right people for your project. You want a cover letter to have the name of the editor that you're writing to. Make sure that matches up with the publisher that you're sending it to, because Susan Ferber, Cambridge University Press won't get you very far. I know this sounds very, very, very commonsensical and rather insulting, but it happens a lot. And it happens a lot more in the digital age than it used to when everybody would print things out and put them in the mail. There's absolutely nothing wrong with printing things out, by the way, and putting them in the mail. Many publishers like to read things in hard copy form. And the advice about printing out what you've actually worked on and seeing it in finished form is, I think, absolutely essential. Many times I ask people how long their projects are, and they have absolutely no clue because they've been writing everything in bytes and as files. And it is impossible to tell when you have gone way over your book contracted deadline, perhaps, or the chapters can be very, very uneven, or just the sort of scope and the mushrooming of projects, which I think is much more common with writing on computers and not seeing things in actual paper form. That being said, the cover letter should be short. There should be nothing at all long about this. You need to say who you are, what you're asking the publisher to look at. You do not need to hide if this is your first book. Be proud. First books are fantastic books. They're often the most heavily researched books that I work on. They're often prize winners. Everybody has to start somewhere, and I'm really happy to see them. When I have to look through somebody's CV to figure out where something fits into a writing career, I'm not going to say that looking at the CV is a waste of time, but there's no reason to hide what this project is. You need to give the argument of the project along with the title. Chances are the title is not going to be your finished book title. They go through a long evolution. There are lots of things that happen. You might have a brainstorm one day. Your publisher might say your title should be X, and you think, why haven't I thought of that all along? But at the very least, having something there, even if it's a working title, gives us a sense of time, place, argument, and a sense of what it is that you're writing and who you're writing it for. I will not stress enough in this short presentation how important argument is. This doesn't mean it fits into the field of women's studies and decolonization and modern history. This doesn't mean, the multiple sets of genres that this could reach people in anthropology and in sociology. This is something that actually, is the original nub of what you're doing. And I think, coming to that place with a project is probably the hardest part of doing it. That being said, it may not be what your dissertation argument was. It may not be what your argument was when you started the project, but it is important that you get to a place where your book actually revolves around this argument. Giving it to us on page 1 allows us to at least begin to grapple with it. I would say what you're including in this package, and that will be your book proposal minimally with your CV. Many publishers' websites might say, you know, you can include a sample chapter, you can include an argument, you can choose what you'd like to do. If I want to see more of a project, I have no problem asking somebody for more pieces of writing, but at least say what is available of the project. Your book proposal, as I said, should be a 10 to 15 page document. We need to see a sense of your style and your expository writing here. It doesn't need to sound like somebody's prize-winning book. It needs to sound like you. If that happens to be you as a prize-winning author, fantastic. But I'm looking to see in those first few pages how it is that you introduce your subject. It may be something that you've taken from the introduction of the project, but I would at least begin to think about this as an introduction. It may be that when you talk about your project, what you actually have at the beginning of chapter 6 is what everybody gets excited about. There's nothing wrong with using that to open your book proposal. This should be a document that you can come back to, not as I just did this to serve a purpose with a publisher, but something that actually helps you move along in your writing and develop it. From there, I would make sure that you do an annotated table of contents. You will never again probably need to produce an annotated table of contents. You may need to produce abstracts and keywords in this sort of online environment that we work in publishing, but you'll never have to produce an annotated table of contents for everything else. The reason that I suggest doing it is because chapter titles, like book titles, are often something that are works in progress, don't say a lot at this very moment, and don't give us a sense of the scope of what it completely entails. So I would make sure to have a couple of sentences to describe each of the chapters. Among other things, it allows editors to see the author's architecture and how they are putting something together. Is this chronological? Is this thematic? Is this case study oriented? Is there a reason where there's part 1, part 2, part 3 of this? What ways is the author thinking about this as an overarching piece of writing? And I realize you may have written parts in different orders. These may have been done at very different points in time, but the annotated table of contents allows us to see the entire arc. I would talk about some of your sources if these are important for the book, never before having been seen, or that you have mined particular places. I would definitely include that. I would make sure to talk about two things that, again, will never appear probably in any other document you work on, which is to talk about market, and to do that in two different ways. One, to talk about who realistically are you writing this for, and if that's scholars in your field and you break down the specific subfields of what you're doing, there's nothing wrong with that. Anything that I read that says it's for an undergraduate audience, graduate students, the general reader, and scholars, I think this author doesn't actually know who they're writing this for. The voices, the audiences, the language, the argument, all of those things will differ with those different audiences. So trying to make something appear much bigger than it is can often be something that is a turnoff to publishers, or that we look at and say, this author's not really sure. They're being overly ambitious for this, but they don't really know who it is they're writing it for. If this is a book that is a synthetic book for courses, there's nothing wrong with saying this. We won't be expecting the same level of original research. We may be expecting something totally different. We may be expecting it to match up with syllabi. We may be looking for how many courses are there out there that use a book like this. If we're looking at something that is a research project and that is perhaps a first book, we know this may be a tenure book or a book to establish yourself in the field if you're not staying in it or aiming to be in a full-time academic job. We may have a very different sense of the ambitions you might have for this project. This may be something that you now realize you are writing for somebody else and you want a job perhaps in the publishing field. Perhaps this is the thing that will establish and sort of launch you. So knowing who that audience is, and I've now spent way more time than you should spend in your paragraph form writing about your audience. Comparable and competitive titles is something that I would also do here. This may seem completely ridiculous. I know it probably does, because there's nothing out there like your book. Otherwise, you wouldn't be writing it. Like, I get that. But at some point, when your book is sitting in the library, and trust me, it will be in a library somewhere where somebody will pass by and see something on the left and something on the right someday, what books is that going to sit alongside of? I think that's a really important thing to think about in terms of the scholarship and the contribution you're making. It may be that there is nothing that's been written on this topic in the last 15 years, and so you are coming back to doing an older topic. Or it may be that there are other things that cover different periods of time, and your approach is like that. I would choose some recent books here. It is, of course, a bonus if you choose one or two of those books that might be from the publisher to whom you're sending that proposal. Then we understand why you have selected us. But it doesn't necessarily have to. If you are writing on a different country and you're concerned about including books that may not be in English, I would definitely add that, but I would include at least 3 recent titles here. Among other things, I have to do this at every stage of the publishing process. I find it completely crazy making. And last night I was putting together materials for the seasonal launch and looking at the fact that I only had the books that I could choose from 2014 to 2016, and the book that I was working on and trying to find comp titles, there isn't anything really recent. So I had to be creative about this. But you know the people who you're writing alongside of and the people whose shoulders you're building on in terms of scholarship. And this is your chance to say the author, the title, but also why your book is like, or how it devolves from that one, or the ways in which it makes a contribution that fits alongside it. Saying in this section, you know, this book sucks, or it's poorly written, doesn't really help you at all. But I think, you know, one of the things that allows you to do is to say, this is why my book is different, in a way that a publisher can hear and also potentially use again for other purposes. Last but not least, and I'm going to stop here because I know you have lots of questions and I want to leave time for that, nuts and bolts. Don't call it this in your proposal, but the really practical things matter to publishers. We do care about what stage you're in right now and when you think you might have something ready. If you are 5 years away from completing a full manuscript and this is your first book, I'm not really sure that this is the right moment to do a proposal. On the other hand, if you have a finished project, if you have half of it done, if you have published articles in this, but you are coming to a full draft, tell us where you're at with it. Publishers are patient people. We need to be. We're waiting for original creative work from other people, but we need to know where you're at with it. If somebody says, you know, that they expect to have a fully revised manuscript by X date, I'm not counting on it being that date, but I don't tell people that. But I do have a sense of where this fits into the trajectory. I also have a good sense when somebody puts in there what their word count is. And by word count, I mean text, notes, bibliography, anything you expect to have in the book. It does not help me when it says the text is X plus back matter. I need to have a good sense of what this is. It is a very different prospect of looking at something that's 75,000 words or 100,000 words versus 250,000 words. We are always, as editors, thinking in terms of what will this product eventually look like? What does the package entail? What are we going to think in terms of pricing? How is it going to, you know, actually reach its market? How do we actually have projects that come to fruition involve a lot of boring things like Excel spreadsheets that are all based on things about book length? So don't give us pages. We don't need to know, you know, what font you've been using and what font size, but we do need to know numbers of words. If this is projected, that's okay. No problem with that. You also should include here if there are other pieces like maps, images, a lot of graphs and charts, things that will help us actually envision the package that you are envisioning. It is something that from the get-go I like to have a sense of. We don't hold you to it has to be exactly that number, but a good sense of where this book may end up. And last but not least, the very practical matter of, is this being sent just to one editor right now to look at, or is this going to multiple publishers? Different publishers will have different policies on multiple submission. The websites will often say it, but they won't always. There are some series that may be solo submission. There may be times when editors will say, I only want this on submission to me. We will do an expedited review for you. It may be that it is fine to do multiple submission, but you need to tell people that. I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Uli.
Thank you. First of all, the people who just arrived will have more of these handouts from Susan, so just bear with us. I apologize. I may have to leave a little early because I have another job that I actually have to be at because my boss called me to be there. I'll give you 5 more little things that are concrete advice. I write mostly by hand because I don't believe that the internet is your friend when you're writing. Social media is not your friend, email isn't, and it's too easy to switch screens on a computer, and I cannot focus anymore on my computer because my computer actually means email to me. So when I get on it, I see email and I see more email, or I could maybe shop for something, but I do not really think of writing. So I write by hand on a legal pad, sitting in another place, and then I pay an undergraduate student to transcribe my very finely, slowly written writings on a legal pad, which slow me down. I can think while I'm writing. This first thing my student gives back to me, that's my first draft. I edit it by hand, the printed out version, and then the second thing is the first thing I really look at. So I have 2 steps built in where someone has already looked at it. And sometimes the student can even say, this, don't totally get it, but they kind of transcribe. I have to write slowly because it has to be legible. Slows me down, I'm thinking, and I think very differently when I write by hand because the rhythm of my sentences is how I breathe, actually, and it's not the computer. What Ada said, I don't edit while I'm writing then. I don't keep on rewriting and click in paragraph above there and keep on adding stuff more and push everything down. By the end of my writing session, I have no idea how much I've written because I keep on pushing everything down. I've written the same thing I wrote 4 days ago because I didn't remember, because I couldn't see it. So I have no orientation on the computer in my world because it's just lots of text. Secondly, I always have another project. I like editing with people. I've edited a lot of books with friends of mine. I like this other way of having somebody write to me and say, there's something coming in, we need to talk about this. It keeps me in the world of thinking and writing, but it's not my own writing. I like that. As I said earlier, I like external people actually responding to me. My first book I wrote on poetry, and I had a really beautiful, amazing, incredible, wonderful, original section on photography that my best friend pointed out to me was really not for this book. I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever written at that point. I pulled it out, published my first book, and then 2 years later or 3 years later, I had a book on photography. That was its entire book, but I couldn't see that. I loved this part so much, and he had to sort of take me and gently point out that this didn't fit at all. I need outside people, and I think there's a part where you can overdo it, and I think you have to get to a place where, what Susan said, you have to feel confident, this is your voice, and you're telling a story. You have to captivate someone's imagination. Don't forget that. You're trying to tell somebody something, so it has to be clear enough. And if you're so involved in your own research after years, no one even knows anymore what you're doing because you're the only person who knows all this. So for me, it's very helpful to have other people reading it and saying, okay, this works or this doesn't work. I love people line editing my work. I accept virtually everything they do because I feel if it wasn't clear enough for them, it wasn't clear enough. So I'm not very narcissistically invested in my prose. I'd say this is the best formulation. If they think this is not quite right, then probably it's not quite right. So I think getting someone else to participate in this process is a major factor. And I write in the morning because I think there's too many voices in our heads with social media and internet and email and all that stuff. So I think most people write in the mornings because you can still hear yourself. It's very hard to start hearing yourself when you're doing email while you're writing because you're in a totally different tone and there's all these people coming in. And lastly, I think what was said earlier, don't make it into you're writing a book. You're writing a part of something and you're trying to move this forward. But that's why I write by hand, because I can actually see it already happening and I can see how much I'm writing this. So those are my concrete pieces of advice. And we can go back and then people can maybe also raise questions or anything you want to bring up. Yeah.
I have a question about doneness. So how do you know when whatever it is you're working on is ready to be sent off, wherever that might be? And specifically with a book manuscript, if a publisher says they want to read the full manuscript, when is it ready, the full manuscript, to send to the publisher?
Yeah, thank you. My question is for Susan, and I'm wondering if you can share a case study of an argument you received, an overall argument, either of the book or for the book, that you needed finessed by a writer, or that you helped him or her finesse.
Okay. Doneness argument. One more question.
I just want to go back to the idea of not editing when you're writing, because I do that a lot. Like, you go back and you sort of hear your writer's voice calling you and telling you, no, this needs to be fixed, this needs to be fixed. So how do you get past that? I mean, I do write more, but I always wind up going back to the top and then coming back down. So I think it slows me down. So I just want to hear a little bit more about how to combat that.
Hi, I think this is probably for Theresa, and I'm also an anthropologist and was a journalist. Anyway, so I have a question about I like the fact that when you said writing is thinking. I'm in the position where, one does a lot of field work, but then come back to life here and meetings and administration and students and all of that. And it's like, oh yeah, that thing that I did in the summer, and how do I even begin to, how does one even, any tips in terms of trying to process that? Because we're not even at the stage of that it's in the, it's in a book or writing a chapter. It's more like, how do I even start to process and make sense and try to, but still it involves writing. And so I was just wondering if you had any suggestions for the writing that comes before the other writing.
Thank you.
Right.
Oh.
may jump in because I'm going to leave. And before Susan would answer the question about the book proposal, I would say do not show this to an editor, such as Susan, before someone else has read it. Another colleague. You have to find someone you trust and who sort of knows a little bit and who has read it to say, okay, actually, and it's very important to have somebody who says, you know what, actually, it's ready. And you don't think so, but you can actually format this and do it really properly, and it looks really good, but it's really strong, it has an argument. But I do think there's a person in between Susan and you. And I think if you don't have that, if you're in your own head, it's great. Some people are amazing like this, and maybe your second, third book, you feel more confident. But I think there's something really useful about having peers. And so I would be hesitant to say you will know yourself, but Susan may correct me on that. You know, on the editing piece, I think you have to give yourself, I think to have things externalized on paper is really important. The computer does not work like this anymore for anybody, I don't believe. So, and lastly to you, I have a lot of very pretty little notebooks people give me because I'm a writer. So people give me notebooks for presents, they're all blank. I write in all of them all the time. And then I forget them and I lose them, but I draft out little things and I write a lot. I'm taking notes right here. I cannot really pretend that I can remember all of this, but I'm writing. And I'm writing it down, and then I'm writing something else, and then I thought of an entire list of things for myself while everybody's talking, and I do this. And it's you're writing, so when you come back, there shouldn't be as much. You came back from your intellectual, important research field work to now this other world. You know, you should be writing. And so I think this not should in a kind of mandated, you know, kind of military way, but if you're going from zero to suddenly I'm here with my computer and now, that is really hard to do, I think.
Okay. I'm going to completely agree on I know writing is often a solitary process, but working on a project should not be. And if you have not found a group of like-minded people, doesn't mean that they need to be working in your exact area of your exact field. In fact, it's more helpful, I think, sometimes to have a group of people who are not working on similar things so that you don't know each other's jargon, so that you're not as familiar with and just nodding at and sort of letting things go, but asking questions of each other. I don't think you're doing yourself as much of a service as a writer and thinker as you could be. I know making the time for other people's writing can often be very hard, but it's much easier to see things that are that are wrong, that can be improved, that can be can be lauded in someone else's work than your own. And I think being able to step back and do that kind of critical thinking about someone else's writing allows people to make that time for you. So if you have not got that part of your life, I would absolutely work on making that a priority. I think second and third books are often, especially second books, are deceptively hard. And I would not say that those are the ones where people have a really good sense of where they're going, where they're at, and where the project will eventually end up. I have a lot of second book projects that I sign on proposal and then get a manuscript and think, what did I do? This is a complete disaster. How am I going to tell this author all the things that are wrong with this? They've done this once, but I think there's often, a lot of fear with losing the safety net. There's no longer a committee that's set to read your work on a regular basis. You no longer have a cohort. All of the things that were part of your infrastructure working on your first book, not there anymore. And there's a much longer period of time. 15 years, I would say 10 to 15 year range for second books, totally normal in history. I realize that may be much shorter in fields that are not as archivally based or where the things are changing so fast that 15 years means a whole paradigm has happened. But it is really, really common to have projects that go over an extended period of time that are very chopped up. And so feeling like you know when it's done, if I had the answer to that, my God, if I had like a thermometer, I could just like stick in projects and say, oh, here it is, it's ready. It's like, it's like your Thanksgiving turkey, you just know. I think that would be an amazing invention for writers, but there's no such thing. I do think when you've come to the point of a project and you're sick of it, you're past done. When you no longer want and can take feedback from others, then that is not a good sign. So you definitely need to let a project go to other people who may be in a position of publishing it before you get to that point. And of course, when there's something hanging over your head, the first book, it can sometimes be tenure review that makes things get done. With second, third books, that's not there anymore. And so that sort of outside force, not existing makes it much harder to sort of gauge doneness. I do feel like people often have that, Second book is going to be quick feeling. You know, I've done this once. I know what I'm doing. I can see the process much more easily. The truth is, every project is its own distinct creature, and they can take different amounts of time for very different reasons. Writing biography can often be a very extended process. I don't know if people start living in real time with their subject or what happens, but I work on many that go like 3 decades, and I'm not joking about that. The doneness, I think you do need to let other people help you gauge. That being said, I think it depends very much on an author's internal voice. I work with a lot of perfectionists, and I also work with a lot of people who are really happy to let first drafts just show up, as files in my computer that I really shouldn't be seeing. So I do think it helps to have somebody in between, because editors want you to put your best foot forward, and sometimes we can see the brilliance and we have all the time in the world to be able to expend on something, but there are many times when I look at things and think this is just going to need more work than I have time right now. The case study of an argument that needed finesse and how I helped with it. I realized this means sort of giving away the thing that I hate doing, which is the editor's role should be, as far as I feel about this, a much more hidden part of this process. I don't do this for having my name out there. I do it because I want something to shine on its own. I can think of many projects. I started sort of jotting down projects and then thought, this is terrible. Like I'm not going to, both in public here and on a recording that will appear on an NYU website, talk about the projects that needed all kinds of things. But I have been working on something and was at lunch with an author who I've worked with before, I think this could easily be a 10th book. So this problem never goes away of figuring out what an argument might need. But I realized that the structure of the book that the author was describing was from a previous book, a way of looking at a figure within a cohort. And as it turned out, the way that the research had gone, this person needed the fully fledged book about them, not about the whole cohort anymore. And this is not uncommon. I can think of other books that Oxford has published, sometimes 800-page books about one figure that were supposed to be, group biographies. But I think it took somebody stepping back. There was never a really good working proposal for this project to sort of step back and say, based on these sample chapters, here's what I think you have here. And I think you can still make this argument without trying to do all these things around it. You need to get people to the core of what you're doing. And I think for every project, it's quite different from me coming to, something and seeing where it's at. There are many times I work on things that have been worked over, especially first book projects, that there's been, a really good advisor and a good cohort, and this thing, somebody's potentially had a postdoc, so they've really worked it. There's not a lot that's going to change with the argument, but it's about finessing the smaller things on the page and about making the prose sing. Other times I realize it's a process of sitting with somebody who says, I think I want to do this book about this. And you realize as they're talking about it that they're really excited about one piece of it, or that one piece of it is actually not big enough to support an entire book. So I think a lot of what I do is to try to, for lack of a better term, diagnose what an author has and figure out, how to get it to its healthiest and most finished state.
Yeah, so really quickly going to the self-editing question, because I think going back to what you said in the beginning about writing being thinking, because writing is thinking, some editing as you go is inevitable, right? You're writing something and all of a sudden something comes into focus and then you go back and change the paragraph before. So some of that I think is and should be part of the process. I was writing something today and I could tell that it was just getting messy and maybe this didn't go from that, and I just said, okay, I'm not sure, I'm just gonna keep going. And then you force yourself to keep going and then print out and edit. So I think there's different, so I think you should resist the going back to reread, right? So I kind of make that distinction, but I change as I go. And then just going back to your question about coming back to real life and what you do with all this material, because for historians, it's the exact same thing. You go and you spend all this intense time in archives and you take, hundreds of pages of notes, and then you come back and you can't look at them. And you can go 10 months without looking at them, right? So I don't know. So I think actually that is the main reason that my book took 15 years, because I did all this great research and I couldn't come back and work on it. I don't know that I have a solution, but I do know that, what I tell people now who are starting second projects or third projects is you can't wait to feel like you finished your research to start writing, because that's the way we did our dissertations, right? You went away for a year or 2 years, you came back and you wrote. that model doesn't work for subsequent books. So I just kind of would say, just don't wait until you think you're done with research. Just start and let what you write guide what future research you do. So it's just kind of maybe what Uli said about writing in notebooks when you come back, or just writing little things.
Yeah, the editing. This is going to sound crazy, but you might want to try it. If you still, and you can still buy the old school separate keyboards, even if you have a laptop, take the delete and the backspace keys off. Yep, it works. It really does. I mean, it's for those of us Uli's handwriting, that's another way to really stop yourself, because it's really cumbersome to go back and do edits when you're long writing. I hate long writing. I don't do it, which I'm glad he's not here because he loves it, and I really do not like it. But that's an easy fix. I actually do have a keyboard that doesn't have a delete and it doesn't have a backspace, so I am just forced to keep going. And you can switch them in and out. The other thing is to just, don't reread. You're absolutely right. Like, don't let yourself reread, because that's the next day. When you leave yourself the breadcrumb, you can go back. And that's actually not a bad way. Editing is not a bad way to trick yourself into doing the further writing. So if you go back and read the page before your breadcrumb, you're going to start editing, and then you can move forward with that. So just know that you're going to, just tell your brain, we get to do that later. Yeah, it's not like you're not going to do it. You just do it later. For beginning, I know exactly what you're talking about. I think the good way to do that is you have all this stuff. There's got to be a few things that stick out in your brain, though. I mean, as field workers, there's a phrase that people kept using, or there's a moment that you remember. Start there. Just do the so what. Like, why does it stand out for you? What does it conjure up for you? And just do free writing and around those moments. And I think you find your narrative through trying to tell the story of what you experienced yourself, if that makes sense, especially with people who do field work. There's a narrative through everything, so you're just trying to find the narrative. And before you have it, just try to say what's interesting, because that's ultimately what a reader wants, right? What's interesting? So, and some of it's going to be useful and some of it's not, but it's all helpful. And again, just let yourself be messy. I think that's the real problem, is especially starting a new project. You've got nowhere to start, and you feel like you need to say something right away, and letting yourself say nothing or be messy about it, it doesn't have to be perfect, especially in the beginning. So just play around with it. And if you had to tell people why you just spent, I don't know, how many months did you spend, why did you spend that time doing it, you'll be able to tell a story. That's your ladder. That's your framework. And the doneness, you're never done. Every writer knows this. Someone has to rip it out of your hands. What you need to do is, yes, Uli's right, you have to have other people who are telling you you're done. And you have to, can I swear? You have to have what my dad liked to say was the F it gene. You have to develop it. You have to just say it's good enough, because it's never going to be good enough for you, but you have to decide where the good enough is to be sent out, because as we can all tell you, we've all had the experience of writing. When someone else sees your work, they're going to send you back notes. So one of the faults I see, and especially with people with first books, is they polish these manuscripts, polish them, and then they'll get back reviewer comments, and they've felt like they did already the perfect job, and then they get stuck, and they can't incorporate the comments. So knowing that you want to put out a solid thing, a good enough thing, and knowing that you're going to get the feedback to help you make it better, and that'll break your need to, there is no done. There is no done. There's just pressing send.
We can take some more questions. Thanks. I'm going to go over here first, and then I'm going to come to you.
If you're writing, well, whether you're writing on the computer or not, do you have strategies for how to shut out the present, especially the present, which is hard to stop thinking about? So both thoughts and also social media and email and stuff.
Thank you. Take a couple more.
Hi. I'm mostly interested in the creative process. I'm not necessarily a writer, I'm a designer, but the creative process is the same. I also suffer greatly from procrastination. Connected to procrastination is perfectionism. So it takes me a long time to start. That's the procrastination, and a long time to finish. I'd like to get your take on my analysis of this and see if it fits. I get a lot of juice, I get a lot of adrenaline rush from doing the project the last minute and coming up with a great thing. So I think that I'm addicted to that adrenaline rush. Given 6 weeks to do a project, I'll procrastinate and do it in the last minute, and it'll come out great. And then my excuse for why it's not perfect is because I didn't have enough time. But I had enough time. If I start my project and pace it so I don't procrastinate, right, I don't get my adrenaline rush. I don't get my Jones. And so I'm addicted to getting that adrenaline rush. I'd like to know, because I love everything you've said, but have you ever experienced this and analyzed why perfectionist kind of people also are great procrastinators?
One more question. Yep.
Hi, I'd like to know a little more about turning a dissertation into a book. And if you and your advisors or committee have decided this is a topic that's worth exploring for book form, is it reasonable to create a proposal and start sending it out to people before the dissertation is finished, or people looking for your degree to have been completed? And and then also if it's like a social, I'm coming from the social sciences, so for our dissertation there's a very like thick stylistic way of presenting information. And what might we need to know about writing a book proposal, turning a dissertation prospectus into a book proposal that has a much broader audience than your 3 committee members?
We'll go the opposite way. We'll do the opposite way. Okay, how to shut off the present. Man. I use, and it's pretty effective. I mean, you can use blockers. You can use social media blockers. I have one that, I mean, God, I'm just swearing up a storm. It's like, work you effing F. Like, it just, like, flashes on the screen like, you lazy, like, it just abuses me. But it's effective because I forgot I installed it. So you set up the hours. So from this point to this point, you're not allowed to go to X sites. And we all know what our sites are, you know, like mine is Twitter. I just can't stay away from Twitter or Reddit or whatever it is. You just block those sites during working hours. Or go to a cafe and don't ask for the Wi-Fi password. There's no better fix than that. That'll definitely stop you from going on. If you can't go online, you're not going to go online. And again, trick yourself, and that's your reward. So you work for 45 minutes, you get 15 minutes of flipping out about politics. And then you have to get right back to it. So you can use it as a reward system. That's really tough. And I mean, that flows into procrastination because a lot of us procrastinate with Twitter and, you know, stuff we don't really need to be doing. I definitely think procrastination and perfectionism, I mean, I think there's well-trod path between them. I don't know if it's adrenaline that makes the deadlines effective. For me, the deadline shuts off the editor. There's a point where the drowns off the this sucks, and the it lets me get something done. So learning how to shut off that internal voice in advance of the deadline. I mean, I still crunch deadlines. I'm here to say that I'm giving advice that I also need to take. I mean, it's not a perfect system up here, so I still procrastinate. And deadlines for me are just a moment where the editor is finally silenced and you're allowed to work. I mean, Uli's I have to give this to somebody. That's another way to get, like, embarrassment is a good motivator. I have to give this person or I'm going to look like a jerk. You tend to get that. So how to get yourself out of the procrastination. And distant a book, I'm gonna let others take that. But I will say that I have a couple of columns at the Chronicles Vitae site about this specifically, and have interviewed a couple of book editors about this topic. And the first thing I would only say, and then I'm going to hand it off to the professional, the dissertation is not a book, and that's the thing that people get most hung up on. They're completely different things. So just keeping that in mind, like, it has to be completely redone and reconfigured. But a lot of people get stuck on this is the draft of the book, and it's not.
Yeah. So I once went to the NYU computer store and asked them if they could sell me a computer that would not hook up to the internet. And he looked at me like I was crazy. So anyway, so I just kind of turn off the Wi-Fi at home and try to force myself not to get up and turn it back on. And it kind of works. Not always perfectly, but yeah, I try to make it work as much as possible. Or I set the alarm on my phone and say I can't do it before this time, and try to stick to it. The perfectionism and adrenaline rush, absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a hotel room awake at 4:30 in the morning finishing a paper for an 8 a.m. panel. I mean, that's just, and every time I do it, I say, oh, I'm doing this again. I'm too old for this, but yet it keeps happening. So, but I would say that kind of, it works for short projects. So it can work for a conference paper. It could work for, like, this thing I'm writing right now, which is a short piece that's due today. But it doesn't work for the book. It's such a different kind of process. It's you can't write a book last minute. It's a really long, slow process. I also think that the kind of that editing, like really serious editing, not while you're writing, but that printing out and working on it and really editing it and imagining it a different way and then printing it out again and reading it. I tend to do that a lot, even before. And then I give it to people, obviously. But that's a really slow process for me. That also, it's like the opposite of adrenaline. It's like really, there's something really comforting and calming about it that I also kind of get something from. So I don't think it'll work for a book. And I'll let you do this.
I took the shutting out the present a totally different way, which is shutting out the worrying inside of your head about everything going on that you can't control, rather than the sort of technological, which plays into it. But I've been finding myself doing this a lot lately, and actually talking about it, not so much with my colleagues, but realizing that there are many emails I'm behind on because I've focused on the few things that I feel like I have some control on, like sitting with a manuscript and knowing that I can start it, work through page by page, and get to the end and live in the world of a different century with its own problems, which has been somehow comforting, and I realize has gotten me out of the present, and sometimes left me completely oblivious to what's going on in the world, but that's not an entirely bad thing. I realize I'll have all the answers about turning a dissertation into a book, and I won't have all of them, but I can at least start with a few. I completely agree with the statement a dissertation is the first draft of a book. There are a lot of dissertation advisors who've taken on the mantra with their students that write your dissertation like a book and then it'll be done when you finish. I don't believe that's true. It is a draft of your book project. Some are much closer than others, but some of the best projects I've worked on are the ones that have undergone the most change from dissertation to book. I think the social sciences do lend themselves to a different kind of technical writing and a different type of use of methodology in the dissertation that in all likelihood will not reach a broader audience, even a broader audience of people within the discipline. I would finish the dissertation, be able to set it aside, look at starting something fresh and new. It's really hard to think on two tracks. First of all, you'll feel like the dissertation is never done if you're trying to get it ready to deliver to a group of people, but always thinking about the project that should come out of it. Dissertation defenses, I think, can be very useful for sort of stepping back and thinking through with a committee what it is that you eventually want to have come out of it. You have options, which is great. Not all fields are like this, where you can break things apart and publish articles and not consider it a failure if that finished dissertation does not appear in some sort of complete form. I think historians worry a lot more if they come out and they don't have a book manuscript somewhere in that dissertation, but I don't think that's the same issue. I think the sort of real-world applications of the research can often be what to focus on, and I often think that there are reasons that ProQuest and other services make a good deal of money, having those dissertations. If people want that form, they can always get it. So thinking through the sort of core questions and the things that are engaging with, I would say in all likelihood with social science, with contemporary concerns and with the literature that has a market, are probably the best way of thinking about the book project that might emerge. Can you put together a book proposal quickly that might come out of the dissertation but not be the dissertation? Sure, but that probably will take a little more time to do. And I think, you have a grace period after finishing a PhD. You get to be a newly minted PhD for a little while. People aren't expecting the moment that you finish for you to already have the thing that comes next done. And so I would take advantage of that. You also have to think about what will sustain you through, let's say, 5 more years of working on this project. What interests you enough to want to do that? And that's the thing that I think is probably hardest, because you know what's in the dissertation, you know it backwards and forwards, and it may not be a challenge anymore to sort of come up with the project that will challenge and excite you. Is it worth sending in a proposal quickly? I don't think publishers care that something comes quick. We want it to be good. I will sometimes look at things, it's the outline project that I get that someone's gotten a PhD, never published something, and then 20 years later are coming up with a first book proposal. It's not terribly common, but I look at that sort of period of 3 to 5 years and go, that's totally normal. And if something is going to publish exactly as it is, there's no place on library shelves that people need that. What they need is the best book version of something, because they can always get the dissertation version. That can be where you work out a lot of the material that may never appear in book form, that may turn into articles, that may turn into other kinds of things. But I think, I realize impatience is not the sort of, byword of the academy, but you have time to get this right, and you never get a second chance to write a first book.
Other questions? Is it William Germano? Yeah, there's also a book by William Germano called How to Turn Your Dissertation into a Book. And it's pretty helpful until you realize that he actually didn't do it. Then I felt a little bit duped after reading that. He does.
I have his other book on the back of this form. It's now in, I have Getting It Published, which is now in a 3rd edition. I realize I need to update this on this form, but he did another about transitioning your dissertation into a book. It's broader advice. He's giving advice across a lot of fields. Not everything will ring true, and I think he often downplays the audience because in a lot of fields there won't be a much larger audience, but I highly, highly recommend that book.
I just wanted to add one thing that hasn't come up, which is the idea of starting a writing group. I found that really helpful when I was finishing my dissertation. So just 1 or 2 friends, and you meet once a month, and you each bring a chapter, you send it in advance, and it gives you the deadlines, it gives you the responsibility of you have to meet the deadline. It gives you readers, and you make it, a pizza place where they won't kick you out for 2.5 hours, and that you do that every month. And I actually found that helped me complete. So that's another thought. If there aren't more questions, we can go have cookies and coffee next door and keep talking. How does that sound? Great. I'd like to thank our panelists, please.